Sir Keir Starmer has denied that the Chancellor misled the public in the weeks before the budget. Rachel Reeves is accused of exaggerating the difficult state of the UK's finances in order to justify raising taxes. But the Prime Minister insisted there was a point at which the government thought it would have to breach manifesto pledges by raising income tax, national insurance or VAT. But that turned out to be unnecessary. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is in Westminster for us tonight. Chris.
Yes, the Prime Minister has been out and about selling his budget today in central London, also confronting questions about what his Chancellor did and didn't say in a news conference in Downing Street around a month ago. Rachel Reeves summoned reporters, me included, at breakfast time and painted a rather bleak picture about the situation she confronted. And there was no doubt she faced some big and difficult trade-offs. And much of what she said then about what was to come in the budget did come to pass. But there was a particular emphasis on that day around productivity growth. That's a measure of the output per person in the economy per hour, and a sense from the forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility, that there'd been a downgrade in that productivity growth, with the expectation that that would leave her with even more awkward decisions to arrive at. That is true. It did do that. What we didn't, though, get from the Chancellor that day was the sense that the tax receipts projected into the future were much, much better than some had expected. And that's why plenty of us there that day felt misled on your behalf.
Andy, how old are you now?
3.
I'm
3.5.
3.5, that matters.
Questions about numbers, questions about words and actions, from downstairs in the nursery to upstairs, and a speech from the Prime Minister about the budget, including scrapping the 2-child cap, which has limited benefits payments to larger families.
The budget was a moment of personal pride for me. I do not want to see a country where children grow up in poverty.
But he was candid about the hike in some taxes.
Tax rises do make life harder for people. I understand that. Politics is always about making choices.
He also talked in broad terms about his desire for further benefits changes and getting young people into work, getting rid of what he called unnecessary regulations, and a closer trading relationship with the European Union. But the questions he faced were largely about this, a news conference the Chancellor gave a month ago, setting out her stall for the budget choices to come.
I want people to understand the circumstances we are facing.
Nothing Rachel Reeves said here was wrong, and she did confront circumstances that meant really tricky political trade-offs. But she left us with a misleading impression that day, which suggested a bleaker backdrop than we now know the spreadsheet she'd seen then revealed on Budget Day. And it's not just reporters making this observation. Privately, so are some of the Chancellor's ministerial colleagues who feel misled, prompting this response from Rachel Reeves today.
You would never expect a Prime Minister and a Chancellor to go through all the detailed numbers. The Cabinet are briefed on the morning of the budget on the budget numbers.
Back at the Prime Minister's speech, here is a flavour of some of the questions. Isn't the reality that in failing to be candid about the breadth of what she knew at her pre-budget news conference, the Chancellor misled us?
Trust matters. How can our viewers trust anything you say?
A Cabinet Minister has told me this morning they do feel misled.
Sir Keir Starmer repeatedly said a downgrade in the forecaster's estimate for productivity growth made things harder, and it clearly did. But he did acknowledge there was other data, which the Chancellor didn't mention at the time.
Of course there are other figures in this, but there's no pretending that that's a good starting point for a government. It isn't. And there's no to suggest that a government that is saying that's not a good starting point is misleading. It is wrong, in my view.
Labour's opponent sense the Chancellor is vulnerable.
We're talking about financial probity. We're talking about market abuse. A CEO who did what Rachel Reeves did would have had to resign. And she should be held to the same high standards. She's the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
She misled the public and she misled the markets. And if we cannot rely on the Chancellor of the Exchequer telling the truth to the public, then the United Kingdom government is in a dismal situation.
It's been a bumpy few months for the government. Plenty of Labour figures say roll on the holidays around the corner. Santa arrives 3 weeks on Thursday. And there's a thought, if you've barely given a moment's thought about Christmas, which is certainly the category that I'm in. I'm struck tonight by two brief observations. The pride that the Prime Minister exuded today in the contents of his budget, and the reflections of plenty of Labour folk in private that the process running up to the budget, and indeed since, has been far from ideal.
Chris Mason in Westminster, thank you. So the head of the Office for Budget Responsibility has tonight resigned after the whole budget was leaked before the Chancellor had even got to her feet in the Commons. Richard Hughes had been in charge for 5 years. Rachel Reeves has thanked him for his public service. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
A shock resignation for a very specific reason. Richard Hughes, head of the critically important independent budget forecaster, carrying the can for the extraordinary early leak on the morning of the budget, as he indicated to the BBC that evening.
You could see that there may be a route for some sort of resignations here.
Whatever the decisions of the Chancellor and the Treasury Committee are, I will accept them.
In his letter of resignation today, Richard Hughes said the inadvertent early dissemination of our economic and fiscal outlook on the 26th of November was a technical but serious error. I have therefore decided it is in the best interest of the OBR for me to resign as its chair and take full responsibility. An internal review revealed dozens of attempts from early on budget morning, even before she lifted the famous red box, to access the forecast on the web, before it was accessed 43 times by people guessing a hidden web address for 38 minutes, an hour before the actual budget speech. It was called the worst failing in the OBR's 15-year history, and it happened once back in March too.
That was a really bad mistake, and it was extraordinary watching the budget coverage before the budget came out, with all of that information going into the public domain. But I don't think that changes the fact that that Richard Hughes was an effective chair of the OBR, that this is a difficult time for the OBR to lose its head.
Mind-blowing.
I mean, it's a terrible sort of end to all the speculation, if you like, that we've been going through in the build-up to this.
I think I need a red box. I can deliver the budget now.
Ultimately, Richard Hughes accepted responsibility for a technical error that allowed the rest of the world to know the contents of the budget early. But there were wider tensions around this budget, with some Labour figures saying the OBR was too restrictive for the government's economic ambition. Faisal Islam, BBC News.